One day I read that Skylab 4 was going to pass over the Finger Lakes. In the west, I began to see a moving light. And as it moved, I said, I wonder who those guys are up there and what they're like. And 6 years later, I married one of them.
As we moved closer and closer to the launch time, we started looking at each other and laughing. We had waited 7.5 years for this mission and really enjoying the moment.
The very tippy top of that rocket is your dad, somebody that you love and care about a lot. There's a moment of terror there that's undeniable.
We don't know what to do. We've never seen anything approaching this in training.
T-minus 55 minutes and counting, and the countdown continues.
None of us said, damn it, stop, call it off.
If invasion is undertaken, the Russians have said that they would retaliate with rocket fire.
We believed we were on the precipice of perhaps a nuclear war.
The rumor was someone was going to come in and attack them with guns, and they were afraid for their lives.
And it's funny, lynch mobs can be vicious, but they're not terribly courageous.
And he looked at them and he touched a few of them and he came back to me and he had tears in his eyes. And I said, what are you experiencing? He said, this is the saddest work of art I've ever seen.
I have no idea what, Jerry would have thought had he known at the time that a woman he was eventually going to marry was involved in this.
I just kind of leaned back and looked up at the earth and watched it go by, and I remember feeling very much like a wing walker in the old barnstorming days, standing on top of the wing of an airplane while it's flying along.
We were both undertaking peak experiences in our lives, time in which great change would take place, and our lives would truly never be the same again.
Welcome everyone to the Voice of Meaning, and I'm very, very honored to have with us Pat Musick, and you're going to get to know her very, very well. And I'm very happy to have Bill come back to us, who we interviewed previously. And Bill and Pat have a very, very special friendship that I love hearing about. So we're going to begin. And Pat, I know you as an artist, and one of the subjects of a documentary that Bill made called The Artist and the Astronaut, and somebody who's still working at age 97, which I find fantastic because I personally have decided to not retire. So you're now an inspiration. You're the oldest person alive that I know who is still working. And I'd like to ask you, Pat, what got you started as an artist? What's your earliest recollections about that?
Well, first, Neil, I would like to thank you for the honor of wanting me to collaborate with you on this project, which I find very, very exciting. It's actually right up my entire family's persona because my three daughters are all about communication, and that the source of all life is in love. And so thank you very much for the invitation. My earliest memory of creating deals with a Navajo woman who came from our church in Southern California to live with my family when my mother was ill. And I was 5 years old and my younger brother was 3. She lived with us for 2 years. And in her spare time, she would sit and make beaded belts and necklaces and wristlets and panels, and create these incredible patterns. I would sit at her feet and watch her, and watch a sun appear in gold beads, or a lightning bolt against a blue sky. And I learned so much about color and line and form at an extremely early age by my association with her. I did not even know the term artist, but I knew from watching her that I wanted to take my hands and create something beautiful when I grew up, and something meaningful. I was fostered in that dream by my mother's twin sister, my Aunt Louise, who loved to draw. And she would sit on the floor and draw with me, and we would do these wonderful cartoony sort of figures. So those are my two very earliest memories, and imprinted in me was a deep desire to express myself. It laid somewhat dormant until high school. And then I was fortunate enough to be in a high school that had an art major as a preparation for college, a very, very unusual curriculum. And the students who participated in this program were responsible for developing the annual yearbook that most high schools have, with the life stories of photographs of the kids and their activities throughout the 3 or 4 year period. And as a senior, I was selected to be the editor of that, which gave me a tremendous portfolio to present to college or university when I wanted to apply. And then ultimately I did apply to the University of Southern California, and had my interview and was accepted and granted a scholarship. And so that was the beginning 2 decades of my artistic life.
Very interesting, thank you. According to my math, you grew up during the Depression, and you went to school probably towards the end of World War II. That's an incredible time in our history. Any thoughts about that?
A lot. I was, you're right, very, very much a Depression child, living in a Depression family, and deeply impacted by the values that grew out of that experience. One doesn't waste food, one doesn't throw away anything, one tries to recycle or reuse. And it impacted my life just in so many ways. But perhaps at least my memory of the most important way was politically. I can remember as a 4th or 5th or 6th grader sitting on the playground at noon doing political plays and presentations to whoever my little brother could show into coming up and watching. I can remember a political ditty, Roosevelt sitting on the fence. Ought to teach land and some common sense. in the presidential run of what one would it be, in the 1930s. And then that extended into World War II. I was a high school student all during the American involvement in that war. I took my dog downtown and draped a sign over him and selling war bonds, and I had a one-night stint in a factory, on a peach factory, processing peaches that were being canned to go overseas for food source. And then they found out I was underage and they wouldn't let me do it. And I was an air raid warden for our neighborhood. Had a 4 square block area that I was responsible for, and trained as an air raid warden, learned how to do CPR, and didn't mind speaking my mind to anyone that I heard express proactive feelings for fascism or Nazism. And
I just want to say something real quick, because I had the pleasure of interviewing Pat, well, knowing Pat for a decade, then interviewing her many times. I cannot tell you how difficult it was for me over the course of 6 years editing this film and not keeping those stories into the film, because it was the artist and the astronaut, and I had to kind of move quickly through their youth. But every time I listen to her talk about that, I know that there's a prequel movie just about Pat's life. It's a fascinating. The image of the dog with the sign is just too cool. So I just want to say, I kick my own butt sometimes when I wish some of these stories could be in there, but that might be for another film.
That's wonderful. Maybe I can be involved in the butt kicking in this interview. I love to listen to people's backgrounds. It's very, very important. So continuing, you went to school during and right after World War II. Now, again, according to my math, we're either late 40s or 1950-ish. You graduated. Where to then? What happened to your life after you graduated college?
I didn't graduate college, and
Okay.
that's a whole wonderful story. Don't let me leave it out when we get there.
Well, let's hear it now.
No, we'd have to leap ahead to the 1960s, and
Okay.
When we get to Cornell, it'll come out.
Okay. So you left college. Where did you go from there?
Well, let me say that I met my first husband in high school. He was a senior and I was a sophomore. He saw the picture of me selling the war bonds with the dog and said, "Boy, she's got great legs." And the next day he made sure he met me in high school. And he went off to serve in World War II. He was in the South Pacific Theater. And I finished high school, and he came back, and we started school, university together. Even because of that 2-year gap, he was a freshman along with me. So by the end of my sophomore year, we realized we really wanted to get married, and I quit school, and he finished, including the work for a master's degree. I worked to support the two of us. He was on the GI Bill, so we did have that too. But I worked at some commercial art jobs doing fashion illustration for a local newspaper. And so I was able to keep my hand in drawing and learning a lot about composition and line. And so it was not a wasted time. And 3 years into our marriage, I found myself pregnant. So my decade of the 20s and early 30s were dedicated to helping my husband foster his career and bearing and raising 3 little girls. He became a football coach, which has many things in common with being a service member, which my second husband was. He was gone from the family, and I was the sole responsibility for many weeks at a time. Recruiting took up about 6 months of our yearly life, but he had wonderful 2-month summer vacations in which to devote to the family. And throughout this experience, I didn't realize it, but what I was doing was a reflection of Coretta Scott King's comment when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and she was asked about the amount of time that they had in their marriage, that the family had with the father. And her answer was, it's not the quantity of time, but the quality of time. And without having heard that, it was something that developed within me. I felt a tremendous responsibility in the decade of my 20s to provide the girls with a father when he was not able to be there, to provide them with his lessons, his love, his caring for them. And I felt that was my job, and I never regretted, as sometimes happens with people who sacrifice the period of time of their life, sacrifice their own interest or their career goals. I never felt any regret at doing that.
Perhaps we should not say sacrifice, just say postpone.
Yes, you're right. And I never felt any regret at postponing my career interests or goals.
I also understand, besides your fine art, you're a very good writer and good expresser of words. Is that, and you've written poetry in the past, is that correct?
Yes. The writing comes from doing a master's thesis and then a doctoral dissertation. I learned a lot about writing and writing skills, and I think the love of it comes because of the creative act that it is. And over the years of my teaching, I grew to believe that we are all born creative. It's how we define creativity that sometimes creates a problem of understanding that you don't have to make a painting or write a poem or create a symphony or ballet, an opera to be creative. There's such things as creatively driving a taxi or selling hot dogs, or every activity in life requires creative problem solving, and the steps of that are involved in that are the same no matter what you do. So that I could take a class of students who at the beginning of the year said, I can't create anything. And by the end of the year, they were expressing themselves all over the place. I guess that's it.
Well, it was very creatively put. So let's talk about 1968, which was a tumultuous year when Dr. King was assassinated, when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Where were you, and what place in your life were you in 1968?
In 1968, I was the wife of the head coach of football at Cornell University. And I was trying to resolve how to get a formal education. We started coaching at Dartmouth in the early 50s, and it was at a period of time when Dartmouth College did not allow matriculation of females. And so I audited some classes, a lot of classes. I had artistic study with the artist in residence there at the time, Paul Sample, for about 8 years. I attended lectures that I got no credit for, and I had the assistance of some of the brilliant young men on the football team who would find out my thirst for knowledge and say on the bus coming home from the Yale game, I was sitting in the seat beside my husband, and this huge defensive lineman walked up the aisle and put a book in my lap and said, "Read this. You need to read this." And it was Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago. It was the first I learned about Russian writers, and it led, of course, to pursuing more of his books and then more of some of the other great Russian writers and poets. And I was even lucky enough that when Yevgeny Yevtushenko toured America, he appeared in upstate New York in Rochester, and I drove from Cornell up there by myself just to hear him read his poetry. So I was trying to find a way for a formal education, but I didn't want to start back as a junior in college. I felt I had so much education at Dartmouth that was non-credited, but I also had so much life experience, and I just didn't know how to put this together into some kind of credential that would allow me to pursue a profession. And so that is where I was when the two assassinations occurred. I remember my husband, Jack, coming in the bedroom early in the morning, and he always woke before I did and said, which one came second? Was it Bobby Kennedy after Martin Luther King?
I believe so.
Yeah. Bobby Kennedy was just assassinated, and I just collapsed in bed in tears.
I remember that well too. Now, you were at Cornell already, or you were still in Dartmouth?
I was at Cornell during their assassinations. I was at Dartmouth when John Kennedy was assassinated.
Yeah.
That's a kind of interesting story. I was on a bus going up Fifth Avenue to visit some art museums when whenever Jack would go to Princeton or there was Columbia, I would go down early on Friday and have Friday in New York, and then I would meet him at wherever the game was for the Saturday game and the festivities afterwards. But I would take Friday for myself just to go to the always the Metropolitan and always the modern art, but try to catch 2 or 3 galleries on Madison Avenue, that were doing interesting exhibits. And the bus was putting out a tremendous amount of whatever, and I was kind of choking on it. And so I decided to get off, and I jumped off the bus, and I found myself in front of a gallery that had not been on my list. And I thought, oh, well, I'll see what's in here. And I walked in, and the gallery owners started to pull back screens of paintings for me to look at. And at the bottom of one was a beautiful 3-dimensional bas-relief bronze that was hanging like a painting. And it was of Moses with the tablet in his lap. And I was just so taken by that. And I asked him the story of it, and it was done by Ivan Mestrovic, who was a Yugoslavian that had expatriated when Tito came into power, and he had spent 10 years or so at Notre Dame, and then he had moved to upstate New York, and he was at Casanovia. And I knew of his work from a Catholic priest friend of mine who collected a couple, 2 or 3 of them, of his pieces, and loved his work. And so I ended up buying this bronze, which meant I probably wouldn't get my new washing machine that I needed. And I arranged to have it shipped home. I still have it. It hangs on the wall behind me, and is a favorite of my granddaughter, the daughter you met, Lori, who did a college study in Yugoslavia and fell in love with Mestrovic's work also.
So let's get back to that moment where it kind of struck you when you saw this piece of art, and I hope someday you can send me a photo of it. What was going through your heart, your mind, your gut? What prompted you to need to buy this and sacrifice your washing machine for a while?
The face is incredibly beautiful. And the gallery director said, it's Moses, but it's a self-portrait of Mestre. And it was as if I then had communication with him, a very strong feeling that I was receiving some kind of message from him, and I think it was that caused me to want to live with it.
Interesting. And this artist you said ended up in Casanova, New York, which I remember well. I'm a native Syracusan. Yeah.
And he invented a very interesting process. The reason I could purchase it in terms of price, but also in terms of weight, because it was a very, even though it's a small piece, it would have been very heavy if it were a solid bronze. He had developed a process of threading a gun with a thread of bronze, that as he fired the gun, it melted the bronze, and so he could do the clay model, and then just spray the thread of bronze into the model form, and then break the model away and have it was like maybe not even a quarter of an inch thick piece of bronze. So it made the price something I could afford.
Very, very interesting. So we're back at Cornell. You were able to achieve, obviously they accepted you for a graduate program based partially on your life experience. Is that correct?
That happened because of the social upheaval at Cornell, the Willard Straight Hall takeover, which is described in the documentary so well by Bill. It's a beautiful segment. When that happened, both Jack and I became immediately involved because some of our students went into the building and as part of the takeover and the protest. And some of our Black students on the football team went into the building, and some of our Black students stayed out. And one of those was the captain that year, Theo Jacobs. And he was a young man that Jack and I were extremely fond of, and that we had in our home many, many times. And Theo and another Black student were afraid of that they were going to be victimized by a group of people from out in the country of Ithaca, that rumors had it that they were coming with guns to take care of the affair. And so we stayed up all night with Theo and his friend playing Monopoly in their dormitory room. I remember watching the sunrise, and we were still at it. Anyway, the Black students stayed in the building for 2 or 3 days, and negotiating with the administration to have some of their needs attended to. One of these was that they felt they didn't have a place where they could meet as a social group, like a fraternity, and they wanted to have a Black student center established on the campus. They wanted more historic Black subjects taught on the campus. They wanted their views to be listened to and related to by all of the student body. And as they negotiated, one of the agreements on the part of the administration was that Black students would be admitted to the graduate school who did not have undergraduate degrees, but had some sort of life experience, maybe be helping a social worker, interning for a social worker, some life experience that pertained to their educational goals. And that they would be able to pass their courses with good grades. And so an announcement about that concession hit the evening newspaper. And the next morning I was on the step of the graduate school and asking to talk to the dean. And when I got in to talk to him, I put the newspaper on his desk and I said, if you're going to give this to them, you also have to give it to me. And he said, go away. Go away and do what coaches' wives do. That was his response. And I said, no, I will not go away. I want an education. And I want to be admitted to graduate school and prove to you I can do it. And he said, find a committee. And so I did, of 3 faculty members who supported me. And I was admitted to the master's program in art and design in the School of Human Ecology at Cornell. And I think I was the first white woman that ever did something like that. I had a young man in the elevator of one of the buildings we were going up to class, look at me and say, I wish my mom would do this.
This is wonderful, and you're the embodiment of what Bill's dad said in an interview a month ago or so, and that is never give up. And
yeah, that's me.
Yeah, is that maybe one of the secrets to your longevity and still being productive at your age?
I wouldn't be surprised, Neil. My daughters think so. They just laugh at people now when they say, when are you going to quit? And that is something I do want to make clear, and I don't want to forget it. You talk about me still creating. I am not still creating paintings and sculpture. It has morphed into something that's more realistic for the abilities of a 97-year-old. And that's where the writing became so important. And I'm loving writing poetry and it just, I have no regrets now, although I do express in the film that there are days I think of something I'd like to do and I wish I could. I don't have any regrets. I'm enjoying the poetry.
But you're still creating. You're creating with words.
Yeah.
And you're doing some things to market artwork that you've done before. You mentioned you're refurbishing art that is going to be in an exhibit next spring.
Well, I'm supervising it.
Supervising, okay. Well, supervising is work too.
And I do have this wonderful, absolutely wonderful Oaxacan woman who comes on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons, and she does a few house chores for me, but the main thing is she cooks me a couple of dinners for the week of Oaxacan food, and I supervise her. She said, "Don't do that this way in Oaxaca."
There are two other things before we finish I'd like to possibly highlight. One is your work, Our Fragile Planet, and your work together with Jerry, and how you synergize there. A lot of, I'm skipping over some things because a lot of information is in the documentary that I hope will be universally available soon. But I love the idea of this collaboration between an engineer, astronaut, and an artist. Could you comment a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd like to start with when Jerry and I were first together. He again got up in the morning before I did, and he was shaving, and he came out, and I was just sort of waking up, and he said, "I just had a wonderful idea. I can make your frames." And I smiled at him, and I didn't say anything, but running through my mind was, I think it's going to mean more than making frames. And when he came to discover that it did, I would get an idea and I would poke him and I'd say, "Hey, Chair, I have an idea." And he would say, "How much does it weigh?" Because he soon found himself making really big things. The largest thing that we made was the sculpture at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Arkansas, and it's 75 feet long and composed of 35 stone plinths that each weigh about a ton. So we began with frames, and then we moved on. Again, our ability to create was derived from the fact that the creative problem solving process is the same in everyone. You have a problem and you identify it and define it, and then you say, "How will I solve this?" And preferably you have two or three more than one idea, but you try the first one. And if it gives you the result that you want and hope for, that's great. But if it doesn't, you go on to the second one. It may involve destroying the first attempt that you made, and you try until you have eliminated all of the ones that don't work, and you hopefully have ended up with the one that does. And that process, if you start analyzing a problem that you have in your daily life, you'll find that process exists. So it was not a problem for Jerry and I. I mean, we weren't battling, no, this is a better way to do it. He made many suggestions that I would look at and realize was a better way that helped me arrive at the solution I wanted. But I would have the idea, and once we had the way that we were going to do this, we would divide the activities that I could do and that he could do, and then the ones we needed to do together. And we would just begin to build whatever it was. So it was a good way of working, and we enjoyed many just great days together doing that.
Creative problem solving. I love that term, and it's something that we need to remember, particularly the politicians of our country. It's beautiful. Thank you. Well put. Your latest project, Continuum, which you're going to have an exhibit this spring. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, Continuum was created in 1968 while I was at Cornell and in this search for my future that I described. It happened during the Willard Strait takeover. That was a part of it. I was taking the senior auditing I was registered for the senior thesis in painting with Alan D'Arcangelo, who was a New York City member of the pop artist time, which was Andy Warhol and Lichtenstein and Wesselman and many really fine artists. And Alan did great, enormous scenes of highways, but he would take a small segment, like half of a road sign, and Alan would take like half of a road sign and part of the road with maybe the double line in it, and blow that up into a gigantic canvas 20 feet long. And it was very, very dramatic and very minimal. And he walked around and looked at everyone's work for about 2 weeks. And then he had an interview with each artist. And he came to me and he said, "Why are you trying to paint like Rembrandt? It's been done before and better than you can do it." And boy, he set me back on my heels. And I looked at him and I said, "Well, Alan, what would you have me do?" And he started talking about working big, because I was working on a Rembrandt size small painting. And he said, "Have you ever analyzed Andy Warhol's work?" And he went into quite a long explication of Andy's work and how beautiful it was. And I let him talk. And after about 20 minutes, I said, "Alan, why should I paint like Andy Warhol? It's been better done and better than I can ever do it." And he laughed and he said, "Okay, let's see what Pat Musick can do." And he gave me the assignment of picking something I knew very well and blowing it up twice life size and creating it. And I asked my husband that night if he would pose for a painting, and he did. And that was the first large scale painting I did. And it changed my life in terms of creation. I did not give up small work, but I took large work into my oeuvre, and I absolutely loved it.
And lastly, I don't want to tire you out, but I noticed you recently published a book of art regarding the Trail of Tears. What what's your connection there, and what prompted you to want to spotlight that?
I recently what?
You have I think published a book of your art about the Trail of Tears.
We were in England, and we had gone out to the farthest point on the western shore to Barbara Hepworth's old studio, and she had a small bookshop, and I had picked up a book, really small, and took it on the plane with me and read it. And it was a book on Andy Goldsworthy, whom I was aware of, but it had not a lot of information. And in the book, he took of a very large sculpture in a truck and toured from northern to southern Scotland, stopping at the sheepfolds. And he would set his sculpture up in the sheepfold or in front of it or spanning the wall, and photograph it. And the book was called The Arch, and it was the story of taking a sculpture along a trail. And I poked Jerry and I said, I've got an idea. And he said, how much does it weigh? And I said, I'm not sure yet, but I told him the idea and he really liked it. The minute I knew that I wanted to take a sculpture on a trail, I knew it would be the Trail of Tears, because this is Arkansas, and I was living in Arkansas at the time. This is Arkansas's most famous trail, and it's one of our history's most important trails. In the 1830s, President Andrew Jackson acceded to the white settlers in Georgia and the Carolinas and agreed to move all of the Native Americans out of the territory into the Oklahoma territory, 1,500 miles away, so that the white settlers could have the land and the advantages to themselves. This process was done by 15 different groups of Native Americans, and there were 5 tribes of Indians that made the trek. Some of them walked barefooted from Georgia to Oklahoma. They crossed several major rivers, but the Mississippi, of course, was the largest. The trek took about 5 months, and many people died along the way. Many babies were born along the way. But eventually it happened, and the natives have a beautiful, I wish I could say it, but I can't. It's in the book. They have a beautiful name in Cherokee for it, which means the place where I cried. And that became known as the Trail of Tears.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we arranged to eventually, I found the creation of mine that I wanted to take. It was quite large, and Jerry and I and our studio assistant, and then anyone else who would help us. And they came out in each place that we stopped on the Trail of Tears. They came out to help us from the town, the mayors, the high school kids, the teachers, and we would set up our sculpture and Jerry would photograph it. He was a wonderful photographer. And he would photograph it, and then we would take it down and go to the next. And we did 23 sites along the old Trail of Tears. Now, in Arkansas, there are 4 Trail of Tears, where 4 of the different of the 15 traversed, and one is across the northern part of the state, which is very rugged, and it's a rather unchanged trail. You can still find great evidence of it. The other 3 trails were in the south. One was the Arkansas River itself, and the other 2 trails have been pretty much ruined by highways and building and farming and so forth. So we followed the northern trail, and it ran very close to where we live, and also very close to the museum, Crystal Bridges, which the sculpture I mentioned earlier is a Trail of Tears piece too, and it's called The Place Where They Cried.
Beautiful. Thank you. Pat, I feel we've just scratched the surface.
We have.
And we greatly appreciate your time. I'm going to make mention of your website. I suggest that you can go on to YouTube, and when you're in YouTube, just put in search Pat Musick, M-U-S-I-C-K, and then artist afterwards, and you can find several things, and we'll try to link them as well, particularly about Our Fragile Planet and the work you did together with Jerry. And again, we've scratched the surface. This is a work in progress. I highly recommend that you go back to the interview that I have with Bill, learn a little bit more about the artist and the astronaut, and hopefully find a way to watch this wonderful documentary. Which, when do you have an estimate, Bill, of when this will be out to the public at large?
Yes, I actually do. It began this morning. It is going to be on demand on Amazon and Apple on February 8th, the anniversary of Jerry's splashdown will be our splash up for the artist and the astronaut. So people can all over the world can download it and watch it, buy a DVD or rent it. That is going to be something that we will begin promoting in earnest once we have locked in all the little pieces that go with it. But that is something that just began in the meeting before I jumped on here. So very excited about that as well.
That's great, Bill. Congratulations.
Well, it's nice to be able to go to places now, and when they ask the question, say, okay, February 8th, Amazon and Apple will both have it.
That's great.
That's wonderful. And Pat, thank you.
Well, thank you, Neil. It really was a pleasure, and I enjoyed it so much, and I feel like I rambled a little bit. You'll do something with it.
No, rambling is good. And yeah, and thank you again. Signing off for now. Welcome.
If I can help you in the future, if you need anything redone, let me know.